former life, I was a mathematician. You might not think that, but I was. I did a maths-based degree at Exeter University, and after I graduated in 1980, I moved up to Bristol to work for the southwest region of British Gas. As a graduate trainee in the corporate planning department, I did all sorts of things. But in the end, I took up a role as coordinator of planning, with my responsibility being mainly to coordinate the ROP, that was called the Regional Operating Plan, a 5-year plan for where the business was aiming to go and how it was going to get there. I enjoyed the role and I felt it did play to my strengths. But when I left to start a family a few years later, it was the end of that chapter of life. As the years went on, it became clear that God had something new for me with a rather surprising call to ordination. And that opened up another whole range of opportunities, challenges, and surprises. I found myself doing all sorts of things I'd never have believed possible and didn't know I was capable of. As many of you will know, I stepped back from full-time ministry nearly 3 years ago. But I'm so grateful to God that just as he promised, there is still a place for me in my Father's house. And now I'm no longer immersed in the same way in the sort of pressures, responsibilities, meetings that come with church leadership. There's been scope for me to stretch my wings in some new ways. So one responsibility I do still have is overseeing the over 65s ministry. And there are lots of different aspects to it, with many people taking a lead in a variety of ways. But for me, there's been something interesting going on. Organising things like the over 65s lunches and teas, the annual holiday at home, has taken me right back to my years when I was coordinator of planning for British Gas. It's like I've rediscovered a gift that I'd forgotten was there. Having the opportunity to use it again has brought life. It's brought life to me, and I think it's brought life through me to the over 65s community. Now, of course, there's so much more to these events than just me using my ability to coordinate things. It's a bit like a conductor conducting an orchestra, because we need all the instruments to come into play to make a beautiful sound. Where would we be without the incredible gifting of Paul Werrett, who together with his team of willing helpers produces a fabulous roast dinner for about 150 people, seemingly without even breaking into a sweat. Without the common sense and commitment of Mike and Jane Watkips, who take a lead on the day, sorting out all the practicalities. Without the vision and attention to detail of Claire Jessup and her amazing team, as they make and serve dainty sandwiches and cakes for our over 65s tea guests. Without the creative vision and energy that make holiday at home the fun day that it is. And the commitment and hard work from so many of you here who helped turn this vision into a reality. So yes, I may coordinate things, but this over 65s ministry, as with pretty much every area of church life, is an us together thing. Picking up the imagery of the church as the body of Christ, Paul writes this: but in fact, God has placed the parts of the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. It's been a good sermon series, hasn't it, that we've been working our way through these last few weeks, thinking about the gifts of the Spirit, how they're like a toolkit. None of us has them all, but we do all have some. And in order to grow and be healthy, church needs each and every one of us to play our part. If you've been around these last few weeks, you'll be familiar with this slide, a slide that summarises the various lists of the gifts the Spirit gives in different parts of the Bible. Some of them might appear more natural, gifts like hospitality, administration, encouraging others, and so on. Others are more supernatural, things like the ability to speak in tongues, that's a language that's given and not learned. Miraculous healings, Or other examples when God moves powerfully to do something extraordinary, like the time when the land for this centre to be built was secured. But very often it's in the blend of the natural and the supernatural that we see God at work. In our sermon series, we've had a particular focus on what are known as the manifestation gifts, described for us by Paul in 1 Corinthians 12. These are gifts that might be given to any of us in the moment, where God's wanting to do something specific, to speak, to act, to reveal himself in some particular way. So over the last 3 Sundays, we've thought about the gifts of the voice. That's prophecy, tongues, the interpretation of tongues. Gifts of revelation. That's wisdom, knowledge, the discernment of spirits. And gifts of power, faith, healing, and miraculous powers. And you know, they're not really our gifts as such. They're gifts that belong to the Spirit that might be given through us to bless the church. But as we become more attuned to the Spirit and step out in faith to exercise these gifts, it may well be that we find God establishes us in a particular area of ministry. So, for example, hearing from God in a prophetic way on a regular basis might help us to recognise and develop a prophetic ministry, as in the Ephesians 4 list. Or as members of the prayer ministry team, we may find ourselves praying for healing, perhaps as a person responds to a specific word of knowledge that God's given. And for some of us, a healing ministry might develop. But it's all the work of God's Spirit. And the key for us is to make ourselves available to God, to be ready to receive and pass on what he has got for us to give. One of the biggest challenges we can face is to have eyes to see what's happening, because we can be incredibly slow on the uptake. That's why we need to encourage each other. You see, once again, we need each other. I remember sitting in a staff meeting one morning many years ago. It was around the time that we were just beginning to move forward with the Heart of the Community project, getting into the serious business of thinking what it was going to mean to build this centre. Jimmy Rocks, who was one of our curates here at the time, had a sense that someone had been given a prophetic song. Well, we sat waiting for what seemed like a very long time. And then it suddenly dawned on me that it could be me. I'd had a song going round and round in my head all morning, a song called Jesus, Lover of My Soul. And the chorus goes like this: it's all about you, Jesus, and all this is for you, for your glory and your fame. It's not about me, as if you should do things my way. You alone are God, and I surrender to your ways. Well, I spoke it out that morning, and honestly, it's stayed with me ever since. And I think it's still just as true today. It's all about you, Jesus, and all this is for you, for your glory and your fame. I've been around in church for many years, but I still feel like I've got L plates on when it comes to exercising spiritual gifts. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that. But we're learning and growing together. So this morning, our focus is on how we can develop our gifts, and particularly thinking about how we can make sure that we exercise whatever gifts God's blessed us with in a way that's rooted and grounded in love, that isn't about us, but that's all about Jesus. And this beautiful passage that Jess read to us from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians is placed very carefully and very deliberately where it is, in the middle of all that Paul's got to say to us about spiritual gifts and their use in chapters 12 and 14. It's like chapter 13 is a slow movement in a symphony. It's a move to a different key, a different rhythm that deepens our understanding of what really matters most. The greatest quality, the most Jesus-like characteristic is love, and nothing matters more than this. Yes, we absolutely should eagerly desire spiritual gifts, But the most excellent way is that we grow to become children of love. But what does that mean when we're thinking this morning about the context of gifts needing development? Well, I think it's important to recognise that it doesn't happen automatically. It's true to say that gifts can be neglected or developed. We get that from one of Paul's other letters, one that he wrote to his young apprentice, Timothy. Timothy was a young believer who'd come to faith in Jesus through the witness of his mother and grandmother. And it seems that Timothy was naturally timid in character, but Paul saw potential in him, gave him opportunities to grow by giving him responsibility. And just as an aside, that's one of the ways that those of us in leadership can help others develop their gifting, to give them opportunities and responsibilities. Paul kept believing in Timothy, encouraging him and challenging him. Do not neglect your gift, which was given you through prophecy when the body of elders laid their hands on you. I don't think we actually know what Timothy's specific gift was, but the point is he knew and Paul knew, and the church needed him to exercise it. Timothy's responsibility was to use it. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. What gifts have you been given? Is there a gift, a talent that you have perhaps been neglecting? And what could you do to fan it into flame? Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. We heard in our Bible reading. That's what Paul did for Timothy. So what could we do to encourage someone else to press on and develop their gifting? You know, I love watching some of our young people getting involved in leading worship. Thank you, those that are playing and singing this morning. It's great to see their confidence growing month by month as they get more experience. And I'm so grateful to those in St. Michael's who invested in laying foundations in our son Ali as he set off into what's developing into a rich musical ministry. Thank you, church, and thank you, God. Love motivates faithfulness and growth. So let's make sure we don't neglect, but that we take every opportunity to use and develop our gifts. Then a second principle to draw out is this: character sustains gifting. Paul's writing to a Corinthian church that's got all sorts of issues going on in it, infighting, jealousies, a lust for power. And you can easily see how some of the more glamorous gifts might lead people astray, make them sound like a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal, if not exercised in love. That's why Paul's description of and teaching about love is so important. What it is: patient, kind, forgiving, unfailing. And what it isn't: proud, boastful, self-seeking, easily angered. There's no doubt about it. Good character develops and sustains gifting. This was brought home to me in the week when we watched a film called Jesus Revolution. Don't know if any of you have seen it. One of the main characters is a guy called Lonnie Frisbee, and he's played by Jonathan Rumi, who also plays Jesus in the fabulous dramatisation of Jesus' life, The Chosen. The film's actually based on a true story from the late 1960s of how God brought about revival across America as many young people coming out of the hippie culture with all that entailed encountered Jesus in a life-changing way. Lonnie has a charismatic, warm, engaging personality and is clearly gifted by God. The church he works with grows exponentially. Thousands come to faith and are baptized, and amazing miracles, healings start to happen. But there's a point in the film when things just begin to shift, just a slight shift. But it becomes more about Lonnie than about Jesus, and things start to unravel. Lonnie ends up moving on and starting over somewhere else, humbled by his experience. Mercifully, in real life, it's not the end of the story. And as we know from the example of people like the Apostle Peter and Paul himself, God's in the business of working in and through flawed human beings like you and like me. But the best way, the most excellent way, is to make sure we do what we can to keep walking the way of love. To allow Jesus's image to be formed in us more and more fully, and to develop the sort of character that's going to enable our gifts to flourish and to bear good fruit. Then a third way that will enable our gifting to develop is this, through practice. It's true, isn't it? Practice leads to maturity. Picking up on Paul's young apprentice Timothy again, we read this exhortation. Be diligent in these matters. Give yourself wholly to them, so that everyone may see your progress. Don't neglect the gift you've been given. Give yourself wholly to using it. Persevere with it. Develop it. See where God takes you with it. And prepare to be surprised. Because remember, we're working in partnership with God. And at the prompting of his Spirit, we never know what else he might have been up to. Some of you may, like me, have been reading this book, recommended for our reading in Lent by the new Archbishop of Canterbury, Sarah Mullally. Do pray for her. She's got a huge week coming up, hasn't she? She's enthroned. But the book is called Dancing to the Heartbeat of God. And it features stories from right across the Anglican communion in the world. One in particular stood out to me in the light of what Si was encouraging us to have a go at last week, to respond to those little prompts, to engage with, perhaps even offer to pray for people that we meet in everyday life. And in one story, out of many coming out of Australia, in an initiative called Hope 25, that was like a season of intentional outreach at the start of last year. It seems particularly appropriate on this Invitation Sunday to share this. A young single mum called Jacinta had been going through a tough time. She was exhausted, struggling to find meaning in life. Then one day, out of nowhere, the thought of church came to her, and with it just a deep inner sense of knowing that church was going to be part of her life. She had no idea what to do with this thought. She wasn't religious at all. She'd never been to church, so she just sat with it. Then almost exactly a year later, a mum from school invited her and her daughter to come to church with her and her son. And with no hesitation, she went along. She describes how it felt like part of her that had been asleep her whole life had woken up. She didn't really understand it, but she didn't need to. She just knew that she'd found a place of belonging, a safe place for her and her daughter to land. I thought that was such a lovely story. The friend who asked her to church had no idea that God had already planted that thought of church in her heart somewhere deep inside. So we should prepare to be surprised when we step out in faith at God's prompting. As we use and practice the gifts that God's given us, both the ones that come in the moment and the ones that are perhaps a bit more resident in us, the natural and the supernatural working together, so our gifting matures. It becomes more evident to those who see it being worked out in practice. So let's encourage each other by giving each other feedback. If someone said something to you, prayed something for you, had a word, a picture, a scripture that's just been spot on, let them know, because it might just be the encouragement that they need to press on into their gifting. And it becomes a thing of beauty through which the life of Jesus is made known, especially when it's done in and out of love. Remember Jesus' words to his disciples the night before he died. some of the most important words he spoke to them then, and that he speaks to us still. A new command I give you: love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Our world needs Jesus. People need Jesus. And we hope and pray that they'll see Jesus in us. So as we draw to a close, let's go back to that list of gifts. As you look at it, what can you see that God has given you by way of gifting? It might not be the exact word, so the gift of coordination doesn't feature in there, but that is a gift God's given me. It's definitely not administration. That's not my gift. But as you look at that and use your imagination, as you know yourself, where are your gifts? What are you good at? It's a gift from God. What would you like to see yourself growing in? What do you eagerly desire? And what's your takeaway from this morning? How have you sensed God speaking to you? We're going to have a chance to respond in the moments. If the band could come back up and be ready to lead us into a time of worship and ministry, that would be great. But I had a little go at this yesterday morning, just as I kind of finished what I was going to say. I went for a walk. And like I said, I often feel I've got L plates on with this. I'm not massively confident about my ability to hear from God. I walked through the churchyard and I said to the Lord, is there anything that you're wanting me to hear, to pass on? And the word courage came into my mind. So it could be, for some of us, you need the courage to step out of the boat, to try something, to see what you could do to develop a gift or to connect again, a gift that you might have neglected. So if the word courage resonates for you, we'd love to pray for you. So anyway, I thought, oh, that was exciting. I heard a word. Oh, I want more of this. I thought, this is what it means to eagerly desire spiritual gifts. It was a really good little lesson, actually. And then the phrase friendship with Jesus came into my mind. Friendship with Jesus, we were thinking about that earlier on, weren't we? It may be that for some of you, church is a new thing. Friendship with Jesus is a new thought. You didn't even know it was something that was possible. But you know, it really is. So if that's you, we would love a chance just to chat with you, to connect with you, to pray with you. If you feel comfortable doing that, do come forward for prayer. But we've got a bit of time before we have to go and fetch the children. Or maybe you feel you've got L plates on, a bit like I've talked about. And just that sense of wanting to desire or wanting to want to desire to step into the gifts of the Spirit is something that you'd like prayer for. We'd love to pray just for God to encourage you, to give you opportunities. Or it may be, as I was sharing Lonnie's story and that thing about it's all about you, Jesus, and all this is for you, that's just for some a slight conviction that it could have become something a little bit more about me than about Jesus. And if that's you, there's no condemnation, but just an opportunity to turn back to Jesus and say it is all about you.